So, when you think of Jim Morrison, what's the first image that comes to mind? Probably the leather-clad rock god on the Sunset Strip, right? But to really, truly get the man behind the myth, you have to look east. Because the whole story of Jim Morrison, both the beginning and the end, was written in his home state, Florida.
And that brings up this central question. Was he a rock god who just happened to be from Florida? Or was he a Florida fugitive who just happened to become a rock god? That tension, right there, is the key to his entire complicated story.
Yeah, the legend was absolutely forged in L.A. We all know that part. But the man himself, he was born, shaped, and you could even say ultimately broken by his home state. To really understand Jim Morrison, you have to understand his Florida story.
And that story starts long before the fame, way before he was the Lizard King. He was just a kid from Melbourne, soaking up the weird, kind of swampy counterculture of mid-century Florida.
And you gotta remember, this is not the hedonistic rock star we all think of, not yet. This was the intellectual, the poet. He's living with his grandparents, he's studying at FSU, and he's just absorbing everything from the beatnik scene in local coffee houses. This is where he was really honing his craft, and it's also where he met his first love, Mary Wearableau, a relationship that you can hear echoes of it all through his later music.
But of course, his path would eventually lead him right back to Florida, and to one single, fateful concert that would pretty much derail his career and define his relationship with his home state forever. At Miami's Dinner Key Auditorium, March 1st, 1969, everything, and I mean everything, changed.
Okay, so to really get what went down in Miami, you have to understand this one thing, the living theater. Morrison had become completely obsessed with this experimental troupe. Their whole philosophy was to just shatter that wall between the performer and the audience, to provoke, to challenge every moral boundary. And he left their show wanting to bring that exact same chaotic, confrontational energy to a rock concert. And boy, in Miami did he get his wish. It was the perfect storm for chaos. Just imagine it. You're packed into this sweltering old Navy hangar, no AC, with like 12,000 other people in a space meant for 7,000. Then Morrison shows up late, he's heavily intoxicated, and he is on a mission. He wasn't there to play the hits, he was there to conduct a ritual, to literally sacrifice his pop star image right there on stage. So, what really happened that night? This is where it all gets messy. The first-hand accounts are all over the place, and it all boils down to the one question that would define his legacy. Did he, or didn't he, expose himself on stage?
Well, the official story, the one that blew up in the media thanks to the Miami Herald, was pretty clear-cut. It painted this picture of a lewd, disgusting performance that crossed every single line. And this report, this is what lit the fuse on the moral outrage and the legal firestorm that followed.
And yeah, there were people in the crowd who backed that story up. You had attendees who swore they saw it, the very act that would become the basis for a felony charge.
But then, for every person who swore they saw it, you had someone else saying, "No way, that's not what happened at all." They insisted it was all just chaotic performance art, and that he never actually crossed that specific line.
And this right here, this was the huge problem for the prosecution. This photographer, Jeffrey Simon, was standing just feet from the stage, and he snapped over 150 pictures that night. His testimony? He saw nothing. And to this day, not a single photograph has ever emerged to prove that charge. Not one.
But whether it was true or not almost didn't matter to the authorities. The public outrage was so intense that the state of Florida issued 6 warrants for his arrest. This set the stage for a drawn-out, brutal legal battle that would basically consume the final years of his life. So for the next year and a half, Morrison's life was just this trial. It became a total media circus, a real flashpoint in the culture wars. In the end, they acquitted him of the felony, but convicted him on lesser charges, indecent exposure and profanity, and sentenced him to jail time. But here's the thing, and this is so important to understand. Miami wasn't some isolated incident. It was really the climax of a long, long history of run-ins with Florida law enforcement. I mean, it started way back in 1963 with a drunken prank at a Florida State football game. This pattern of public intoxication and clashing with authority, it just followed him his entire life. Now, this next part is a lesser-known chapter, but it's incredibly symbolic. Just 3 days after his conviction in Miami, while he's out on bond, Morrison takes a road trip. And it leads him right back to Clearwater, the city of his youth, for one final, deeply poignant moment in his Florida story.
He goes back to Pier 60, a place he had walked with his first love, Mary, when he was just a teenager. He's maybe looking to reconnect with his past, but instead, he finds himself in yet another confrontation with the law. He gets arrested, again, for public drunkenness.
And get this, the penalty for this final Florida arrest? $26. Just think about that. The absurdity is just tragic. On one side of the state, he's this convicted criminal facing 6 months of hard labor for a rock concert. And on the other, he's just another guy drunk on a pier, facing a tiny fine.
So he's facing that jail sentence from the Miami conviction. What does he do? In early 1971, he flees to Paris, looking for a break from his rock star persona, from his legal troubles, from all of it. He would never return to the United States. But his story with Florida, well, it still had one final twist.
And then, of course, he died in a bathtub in Paris at just 27 years old. And because his Miami conviction was still under appeal at the time of his death, legally, the case was never really resolved. That guilty verdict just stayed on his record for almost 40 years.
Fast forward decades later, and the cultural view has totally shifted. In 2010, the governor of Florida, Charlie Crist, who was a fan himself, revisited the case. He cited the flimsy evidence, all those lingering doubts about what really went down that night, and he issued a full posthumous pardon, officially clearing Jim Morrison's name in the state of Florida.
And his bandmate, Ray Manzarek, really summed it up perfectly for a lot of people. The pardon just felt like this long overdue acknowledgement of Morrison's artistic legacy over his controversial reputation. It was like a final recognition from the very state that had both created and condemned him.
So, where does that leave us? The legal record is clean now, but that cultural paradox remains. Jim Morrison was the Florida boy with the poet's soul who became a global icon, only to come home and become a local fugitive. The pardon may have closed the case file, but that complicated, haunting relationship between Florida and its most famous, rebellious son, that's a story that will probably never have a simple ending.